everybody, and thanks for coming back to my channel. My name is Riley. You may know me as Honeybags. I'm a full-time reseller and I resell on Poshmark, eBay, Etsy, Mercari, and Relove. I resell clothing, hard goods, vintage items, vintage clothing. I really resell anything and everything. On this YouTube channel, I really put the spotlight on my clothing because I love sharing my clothing hauls with you guys and kind of giving you tips and tricks about which brands sell for me and which brands I pick up. I personally love watching what other people pick up. So this one's going to be different because I'm going to show you guys specifically vintage clothing, and at the end, or not even really the end, I'm going to incorporate try-ons because I think with vintage clothing especially, just holding the piece up doesn't justify the style, especially when the styles are so much different than what is trendy today. That's what this video is going to be all about. If you're not interested in vintage clothing, this probably isn't the video for you, but I upload plenty of reseller related content on this channel. I'm just trying to incorporate more because vintage clothing, vintage in general, if you guys don't know, if you guys aren't aware, is a huge passion of mine. I started reselling vintage in 2016 and it just totally took off. It consumed my heart, and I love vintage clothing. I love putting my kids in vintage clothing. I love trying on vintage clothing. I love playing around with it. I love reselling it. So it's very much a hobby as it is a profit for me to pick up vintage clothing. So I'm gonna do a little PSA. I am not an expert on vintage clothing. I try my best. I know more about it than I guess like the average person. I try my best to guesstimate what decade an item is from, but I could be wrong. Don't set your expectations too high. If you know more about vintage clothing than I do, feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm always open and willing to learning more about vintage clothing. So these items that I'm about to show you guys, I am going to list on Etsy. So I also list vintage clothing on Poshmark, but I have noticed on Poshmark the trendy vintage clothing like 90s and like late 80s, like fierce shoulder pads and like 90s Disney, that is trendy, so that sells well on Poshmark right now. Whereas the pieces that I found, I didn't pick up because they were trendy, because they're vintage. I picked them up because they're vintage and somebody is going to want to give these items a new life, like someone like me who has a passion for doing stuff like that. The first item is this vintage skirt. So something crazy about this that really blows my mind is pockets. Like the luxury that they had of having pockets on women's clothing back then is insane. This is definitely handmade. I can tell by the stitching, but it is very, very nicely made. I'm guessing this is like maybe 50s or 60s. It seems maybe a little short to be 50s actually, so maybe like 60s. Like I said, I'm not an expert. Feel free to correct me. This item, I was not sure at first if it was vintage because I feel like elephants are like a newer trend. But this is handmade, and just the style of it, like these excessively oversized sleeves and the way this is squared off. I don't know the name of this neckline. I can't think of it right now. The whole entire style of this seems vintage to me, so I am going to list this on Etsy, and I am going to give you guys a little try on this one in the corner. This piece I'm also going to be popping a try on as well. This is I'm guessing 1960s. This one actually has the tags. The other ones did not have tags, which is really common. They made a lot of their clothes back in the day. This is a high waist skirt. I will probably list this one around $30 because it fits beautifully. This one I'm also going to post a try on picture. I love this dress. It really reminds me of like roller rink 1950s, 1960s diner. It's high rise and it has this really excessive flow to it when you like kind of like do a little spin. It's really hard to show you guys, but I think I will list this piece around $30 as well. So $30 with my vintage items that aren't anything exceptional, like something really old or something really sought after. $30 is kind of my sweet spot on Etsy. I also found this St. John two-piece set. So this one, whole style that is like capturing or captivating, as far as like somebody's not going to be looking for vintage items and say, oh my gosh, this is like unlike anything I've seen before, I need to have it. Because it looks like a regular Sunday outfit for like going to church. I'm guessing this is from the 80s, but it's St. John, and St. John is a really high-end brand. I think this will do well on eBay. I'm probably going to skip listing this one on I'm probably going to skip listing this set on Etsy. I will probably list it on eBay around $70 to start, and I will kind of just feel around from there. I do believe this is wool, but I have to double check. And this piece, when I first saw the fabric, I thought, yeah, this is a totally like flower power 1960s, 1970s. And I was definitely wrong because this has an 80s tag and it also has shoulder pads. So I'm thinking this is late 80s, early 90s. It is a long dress. It would look really cute with like a leather tie belt around the waist. I think I would list this piece around $40. I find lots of 80s dresses, and obviously they're pretty plentiful. You know, the 80s were only 40 years ago, but there are some pieces that I pick up because of the pattern, and this was one of them. I also found this little 90s, I'm guessing 90s because it was made in the Philippines, baby outfit. I have to repair it. I have to put a generic white button right here, but this one I actually bought just for my son. I want to do like a little vintage photo shoot with him. This is a 1970s children's bathing suit. This, I cannot believe this still has the elasticity that it does considering its age. This one, I also just want to do like a vintage photo shoot with my kids. That's why I picked this piece up. It's really hard for me to convey to you guys what I'm about to say, but some of you may be wondering, well, how do you know these are vintage if they have no tags? For one, I will look at like the stitching if it's single stitched. For two, once you've been doing this long enough, you can kind of feel when an item is vintage, and that may sound funny and that may sound unprofessional to say, oh, well, it feels vintage, but this fabric definitely feels aged. It feels like you can tell it's lost some of the elasticity due to age, but it still has a lot of it there. I guess you just kind of have to go with your gut and get used to finding vintage, and then you can kind of, yeah, just go with your gut once you're used to it. But once you actually like are familiar with the fabric and the tags and the stitching and really the style, not just the pattern, the way it's tailored, that's when you can kind of judge what decade an item is from better. Like I said, I'm not a professional. I'm still working on my identification skills, but that is what I have to go with for now. This I'm really confused about. I don't know if this is like not a reproduction, but I don't know if this was like made to look vintage or if it actually is vintage. Eat, drink, and be merry, tomorrow we diet. But regardless, if this was made after the 50s or 60s, I'm guessing this was probably made in like the 90s. I don't know. Not totally sure, but regardless, I'm going to put this one on Etsy for about $25. It's just an apron, if you guys couldn't tell. And this piece is the breadwinner for my whole haul. And I'm really shocked that I found it still. So when I saw this dress, I knew it wasn't like your typical Charlotte Russe or Rue 21 sequin dress because of the detail, which is like, I know this sounds really corny, but it is really breathtaking in person. And as soon as I like brushed my hand across it, I instantly grabbed it off the shelf and I was like, oh my God, this is old. This feels like it's 6 pounds of just solid detail and sequins, and it has this really heavy lacing, very, very thick lacing compared to like the lacing that you would see today. It has multiple layers, and it reminds me of like a 1920s flapper dress, but I know it's not a flapper dress. And when I first saw this, I thought this is too short to be like pre-60s, but oh, it's getting washed out. But once I put it up on me, I realized it went past the knees, so this could very well be from like the 30s or 40s. And what really, like, you guys can see all this detail that I can't even imagine the time that got put into this piece. But what really sold me was this crazy old tag, right? So like I said, I don't know, 30s, 40s, maybe. I could be totally wrong. Regardless, I'm going to bring this piece down to my antique mall, even though it's not antique. There's really nice older ladies there who will be happy to not appraise this piece, but kind of let me know like, oh, this is what you're looking at, this is what it's from. If this is from like the 30s, I'm probably going to list it on the higher end because of all the detail. Regardless, this made the entire haul worth it. I'm definitely not going to do a try on with this because I think it's maybe a tad bit too tight. Look at it. Ah! I'm just so happy. Like, I was really excited to find this piece. I hope you guys enjoyed my try-ons. This is, like I said, this is the first time I've done a video like this, but normally I would incorporate these into my regular clothing haul, but I felt like a lot of these pieces really deserved a video on their own. So I thought, you know, I'll separate my haul from regular clothing that goes on Poshmark to my vintage clothing. And the link to my Instagram is down below in the description. My son is obviously telling me it's time to end the video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and happy selling!